You're watching Word Alive Bible Study at Word Tabernacle Church.
I need a word, life-changing word.
A place of relevant ministry where relationships are built, needs are met, purpose is fulfilled, and God is enjoyed. Join us now as we get stronger, grow deeper, and go higher.
Stronger, deeper, and higher every day. We need a word.
Joshua chapter 10, everybody say the will to win. I want to deal with this issue of, and we started talking about this. Joshua 10 is literally where the sun stands still, right? There's a battle raging. We talked about this last week, the issue of kings rising up against Joshua, against the people. Joshua now must wage war against these kings. A reminder to us that there are some kings that are present in our lives that we have never known victory over. And as we teach this book of Joshua this year, we're learning how do we grapple with these issues and how do we have victory. We learned last week that there has to be the perspiration of a winner, right? There has to be a work ethic, and I won't rehash all of that. You can look at the podcast on that. The second thing that we talked about last week was the perspective, and that's where I want to pick up this week around the perspective of winners. We had talked, look at verse number 8, Joshua chapter 10 and verse number 8. And we see here that the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you." So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night. Everybody say all night. Underscore that, all night. Right? That issue of I have this perspective that God is going to enable me to have victory, but it's going to require a fight. And I think this is sometimes where we blow it because we don't recognize that just because God has given victory does not mean I'm not going to have to fight for it. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be some things that I don't have to do in order to get that victory. This is why I'm titling this The Will to Win. I have to want it. Everybody say, I need to want it. This is important. If you want to graduate, you will. If you want to advance in your career, you will. If you want to work out things in your marriage, you will. If you want to be faithful, you will. You have to will it. There are some things we have to will into existence. It just doesn't happen immediately or at the moment that I want it to happen. I've got to will it into existence. And so the perspective of this issue of being a winner is the perspective, and we learned this last week, I'm just going to cover these real quick, is that understanding that I need this challenge to ensure that God leads me in the right direction. So we talked about that last week. We left off with the conversation about needing. Everybody say, I need this. I want you to understand this. I need this challenge so I can share in the sufferings of Christ. You know, this is important for us because oftentimes we want these sweatless victories. You know, I like sports. Matter of fact, I miss sports, be honest. And I'm not a major, fanatic, but I miss it. I do miss it. You know, you don't miss your water, right, till your well runs dry. And so I'm missing sports. I like the victories that require effort. I don't like those victories. I want you to grab this. This is so good if we get it. Sometimes we win, not because we played so well, but because our opponent played so poorly. That's not the kind of victory we want as believers. We want a victory that when I'm at my best, I'm getting victory. And not just at my best. My enemy was at their best, and it was a real struggle and a real war. We don't want these sweatless victories that require no suffering, no difficulty, no hardship. That is not the will we should have. We should have a will that says, God, regardless of how tough it is, I have a commitment and a zeal and a desire to fight my way through it because I recognize that what you have allowed me to experience is needed. This challenge is needed in me. It is needed so that I can share. Let me say this. So I can share in the sufferings of Christ, because if I don't struggle with him, I shouldn't have the right to relax and rejoice with him. You know, I'm learning this, man. The people that are oftentimes closest to us are those people that were with us when we were in the struggle. As a matter of fact, I would argue if you cannot be there with me when it's rough, I don't want your companionship now that it's smooth. We don't want people, and too oftentimes our relationships are hinging upon ease and comfort, things being like I want them. That ought not be what our desire is. When we look at Joshua chapter 10, we start to see that this need, I need this challenge to share in the sufferings of Christ. Now, this is where we left off last week. Everybody say, I need this. I need this challenge to develop disciplines that will be needed in the future. Very, very important concept. Whatever I am doing, if you look at the first 9 chapters of Joshua, it is really a building up to this moment. Everybody say it's building up to this moment. I want you to get this. Whatever I'm sitting with today, God has been building me up to this moment. God is getting me to a point of everything that and this is why it's important that we're not so quick to talk about, I wish this had not happened. I wish I had not been born here. I wish these people weren't my parents. I wish I had what this group has. I wish I had what that group has. Because the reality of it is everything, the sum total of everything I am. This is why the Bible says all things work together for good, right? For them. Notice the language. All things work together. That even the worst thing that happens in my life becomes a partner to the best thing. Because all things are working together. So God takes the abuse, he takes the ridicule, he takes the embarrassment, he takes the mistakes, he takes the sin, and he says, you know what you're going to do? You're not going to be wasted in his life or her life. I'm going to make you a partner. I'm going to talk about partnership in a minute. I'm going to help you work with them to make him or her into who I want them to be. And so what God teaches us is that when you and I have these moments of fighting, it is because he's developing a discipline in me that is needed for the future. Why do you think it's hard sometimes? It's hard because without it being hard, I don't get to develop muscle. Without it being a struggle, I don't get to develop my prayer life. Without it being contrary, I don't get to develop steadfastness. I don't get to develop perseverance. I don't get to develop faithfulness. Very important concept. Don't give yourself credit for being faithful if things have always been smooth and gone your way. You don't know faithfulness until you stick in there when it hurts. We don't know faithfulness until we hang in there when we want to walk away and walk out. So whatever Joshua is experiencing now, his previous experiences have brought him to this moment, and now this experience is developing him a discipline for the future. I want to park here for a minute. We have a lot of young people and I'm gonna record a podcast on this in the next week or so, and I'm gonna drill down on these. Let me say a few things real quick. I hadn't planned on doing this, but real quick. And it's really for everybody, but it's really for my younger people, like college students, high school students. Let me give you some essential skills you need the disciplines you need to develop in order to be successful. Because I think oftentimes, and I'm being very convicted by this, and I've been reading a lot lately and praying a lot lately. And one of the things that I'm seeing, man, is that, and this is the quote, I forget who I can attribute it to, it's not mine, but that there are no dysfunctional organizations. That every organization is structured to produce exactly what it's producing. That's really convicting for me because that would mean there's really no dysfunctional family. It is literally, my family is giving me exactly what it's structured to give me. The problem is I've not developed disciplines for health, disciplines for success. disciplines for things turning out better in my life. Young people, let me say a few things real quick. I'm going to take 5 minutes of my teaching time. I'll direct you to my podcast after I drill these down, but let me give you some disciplines you need to be successful. One of the disciplines you need to be successful is the ability to be a critical thinker. You have to be a person that you just can't be. Let me tell you something, and this is free. Just James Gailliard just giving you this for free. The future does not belong to the person who is a good test taker. The future belongs to someone who can solve problems. It's a bunch of folk that know how to get high SAT and ACT scores, high LSATs and MCATs, but don't know how to solve problems. Part of success is developing the discipline of critical thinking. This is why God allows us to have struggles. This is why we need a will to win, because I'm in it, because God is saying it's not a textbook answer. If you notice, when we look at the battles in Joshua, the battles are all waged and won differently, because there is no one-size-fit-all plan on success and how to conquer. They go into Jericho, they got to deal with it one way. They go to Ai, they got another way. Now they got all these kings rising up against them, and there's a whole nother strategy. God is saying to Joshua, I want you to understand my mind. Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus. Become a critical thinker of stuff. First discipline you need to be successful is critical thinking. The second discipline you need to be successful is continuous learning. God puts Joshua in a space where it's not just what I've known about God, it's what I'm also learning about God. I think one of the mistakes we make is that we get saved and we stop learning of God. Not only do we stop learning, and let me give you the evidence of it. The evidence of us stop learning about God and not being continuous learners is look at the difference, and maybe this will convict somebody, about how many people are in a Sunday worship compared to a Tuesday Bible study, compared to a Thrive group or a small group. As my learning opportunities become more accountable, the numbers get smaller. Because, see, I can be in a big room, 300 people watching, and not learn anything. I could be doing dishes right now. I could be doing house chores right now. But when I get to my Thrive group, 5 people, 7 people, and we all on Zoom looking at each other, or we all coming into a classroom at the church, physically distancing, and now I've got to be accountable for whether or not I read my chapter, whether or not I can participate in discussion. Those numbers get smaller because most people don't have enough will to win to be a continuous learner. I've been saying this to young people forever. You walk up to a person, young people, it's free. It's free from your pastor. I've said it before. I'm not going to take it back. I'm convinced of it. Especially if you're dating someone. But if you're not dating, you're just friends. If the person you're spending time with cannot effectively answer the question of what are you currently reading, then you should not be wasting your time with them. Matter of fact, in chat right now, type in what you're currently reading. No, don't type in the words, what am I currently reading? Because I know how y'all can be smart mouth. Give me the name of the book you're currently reading. Because the truth of the matter, and I'm not talking about the book of the Bible. Don't type in Joshua. I'm talking about what are you currently reading. We have to become continuous learners. As Joshua is learning how to be successful, Joshua has to continually learn how God operates, what God is doing in this season. What God was doing 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is different than what God is doing now. We have to become a continuous learner. I got to move on quick because I didn't plan on spending a lot of time with this. Collaboration. And I'm going to talk about the importance of collaboration as we move on in this lesson, so I'll leave that for just a moment. Character. Our character should count for something. Character is my ability to keep my word. My word is the only thing I give away and keep. I give you my word, and I must keep my word. It's the only thing that I give and keep. right? So having the character to keep my word, having the character to honor my commitments and to keep my promises. Companionship, I'll leave that one. I've got 8, but I won't give you any more. I'll just do it on the podcast. Companionship, who I do life with, who I spend my life with. Young people, all people, old people, middle-aged people, I don't care who you are. Life is too short to spend it with someone you are not compatible with, someone that will not build your life. The importance of companionship is such a necessary discipline in terms of my ability to win as I move forward. Let me get us back to some of our notes. The other thing around this perspective, I'm still on perspective. Everybody say perspective. I need this perspective of a winner is a perspective, and I want to spend some teaching capital here. The perspective that says, I need this current challenge to humble me. I need this to humble me. If you notice, y'all, this is very important. We are not naturally humble. I love this about God in terms of how he deals with Joshua. Because as God deals with Joshua, what you start to see is that Joshua cannot get all puffed up. Because he already has been humbled by the struggle with Ai, right? He has his major victory in Jericho. He thinks I'm the man. I don't even have to pray anymore. Then he winds up getting his butt handed to him in Ai, this little small, little rinky town. Now they recover from that because of repentance and leadership and trusting God and obedience. And then in chapter number 10, these kings rise up against him. And we talked about them, the king of Jerusalem, of Hebron, of Jarmuth, of Lachish, and of Eglon. They rise up against him, verse 5. And then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon gather their forces and went up with all their armies and encamped against Gibeon and made war against it. Let me spend some teaching capital here for just a moment, because I think this issue of humility is so essential to our winning. And if we don't develop a perspective of humility, a discipline of humility, a discipline that says, man, this can't all be about me. If you notice, look at the chapter with me again. If you notice, verse 6 says, and the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal, saying, do not relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country are gathered against us. Verse 7. So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. Everybody say all the mighty men of valor. It's very important. God will deliberately put you in a place that you can't win without other people. Now, I don't want to deal with that yet. I want to spend a moment on humility. I want you to jot some things down. The first thing that I want us to say about humility, and this is very important because don't miss this. Verse 6, the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua, saying, do not relax your hand from your servant. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the king of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country were gathered against us. And then notice the response in verse 7. So Joshua went. Now, that's important. Joshua is the king. Joshua is running the show. But yet he has enough humility to listen to more vulnerable people and to listen to weaker people. I think we are living in a society and a culture right now where we don't do a good job of listening to people that we view as vulnerable or weaker. I want to say a few things about this. We have to spend more time listening. I want you to say this to yourself. I need to spend more time listening to other people. This is very important because oftentimes the answer to what God is doing, God, this is so good. Oftentimes, the answer to what God is doing is found on the lips of those we would consider weaker or more vulnerable. And it's easy for us to not listen to people we view as weaker or more vulnerable because we've not developed the understanding that God has me in something to humble me. I want to share this with you real quick. When I ask you to listen to me and you start giving me advice, you have not done what I asked. I want this process for a moment. When I ask you to listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you are trampling on my feelings. When I ask you to listen to me and you feel you have to do something to solve my problem, you have failed me, as strange as it may seem. All I asked you to do was listen. Because the reality of it is, there's some things I can do for myself. I want somebody to type this in, because I'm not helpless. Just because I have feelings doesn't mean I'm helpless. Just because I feel the way I feel doesn't mean I'm helpless. And so we have to have the ability to develop humility. Let me say a few things about this issue of developing humility. The issue of developing humility is, first of all, as I said, listening to other people. But the other thing about humility is learning to be thankful for what I have. Y'all, this is not just cliche. This is not just talk. If God does not do another thing in our life, we have to learn to say, God, thank you for what you have already done. We can't always come around with our hand out and say, God, give me more. Because here's the reality of it is, it is a statement of my lack of humility to think I always deserve more. The truth of the matter is, I already have more than I deserve. And so here, if I think I have to always have more, it's because I've not developed humility. God will put me in a fight to develop my attitude of winning, to develop my will to win, but to show me that you are in what you're in, to develop your humility, because pride goes before the fall. And so I've got to be willing to listen. I've got to be willing to be thankful and grateful for what I do have. Y'all remember in Greek mythology, Narcissus? That's where we talk about a narcissistic personality. Narcissus in Greek mythology was really good looking, right? And, you know, everybody, men and women, you know, he's so good looking. Men like, who are you good looking? Right? Everybody's like, man, Narcissus is like the man. And one day he goes over to a pond and he looks into the pond as he's getting some water from the pond. And he looks at the image of himself in the pond. And he becomes so enthralled over himself. He becomes so self-absorbed over himself. He becomes so consumed over himself that literally he drowns in his own reflection. This is what people in this industry would call narcissistic personality disorder. People that, let me make it easy, that life is always about me. Narcissism is, you ever seen people singing a song and the only time they get happy is on their song? That's narcissistic personality disorder. Or the only time a preacher comes into a sanctuary is when he or she is teaching, not when someone else is teaching. The only time I want to be a part of the choir is when I'm the lead singer. The only time I want to be a part of a ministry is when I'm leading it. You know, pastors, let me throw this in for free. Let me help you identify narcissism in church. Take any person who's leading a ministry and replace them with someone else to lead the ministry and see if they still stay on the ministry. The reality of it is that God will put us in places that we might develop humility. And we've got to live in such a way where it's not always about us. Let me tell you what it is. We have to learn to other each other. We have to learn to love each other, to be kind to one another, to forgive one another, to place the needs of other people in front of our own. We have to develop this perspective That God, whatever I'm in, it's something to challenge me. It's something to share in the sacrifices of Christ. But I need this to humble me. I need this to humble me. Joshua has to listen. I don't want you to miss this. I'm moving on. Joshua is now listening to what comes off of the lips of someone who is weaker and more vulnerable. Because part of what my attitude has to be is this ability to be able to listen. And let me say another thing. The fourth thing I want us to grab is the partners of winners. The partners of winners. Look at verse number 11. I could say more about this issue of humility. I'll leave it for another time. Look at verse 11. Verse number 11. And as they fled before Israel while they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Ezekiah, and they died. Now watch this. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. Now jot this down. The partners of my winners, of winners. In other words, God is teaching us that the will to win is also the understanding that if I'm going to win, I can't do it by myself. Let me tell you what I've learned. I've learned that regardless of how much we have accomplished, it is small in comparison to what God accomplishes. And it is small in comparison to what collectively other people have accomplished. The Bible here says that God killed more by hailstone than all of the army did together as they fought. That was under Joshua's command, which means, and I want you to get this, God says to Joshua, don't worry about those kings, those 5 kings. I've given you victory. But in order for him to get victory, he needs the help of someone else, and specifically the help of God. Let me say a few things about this. This is so powerful if we get it. The first thing I want you to grab a hold of with this is that God does not call us to public victories of isolation. He does not call us to public victories of isolation. In other words, God is not going to move in our lives in such a way that it's going to be a public victory and I'm going to be the only one out there. It does not work that way. As a matter of fact, I would argue that's why more of us don't have victory. More of us don't have victory, watch this, because we'd rather lose than to get victory and somebody else get the credit. And we've got to recognize, you know what, I don't care who, I was just having this conversation with somebody. You know, it doesn't matter to me who gets the credits. If we really care, we really care about people, then we don't care what nonprofit gets the credit. We don't care what church gets the credit. We don't care what group of people get the credit. At the end of the day, what really matters to us is that we move forward an agenda that helps as many people as possible. We have to recognize that God does not give us public victory in isolation. Let me just say this. This is why diversity is so important. This is why our ability to bring people to the table that have different nuances, different genders, different struggles, different perspectives. There is great victory, let me say it that way, in diversity. There's great victory, and oftentimes, y'all, let me tell you, I don't have time to teach evolutionary biology, but if you were to think kind of back through your study of biology, the reality of it is the secret to evolution is variation. That's the secret to it. See, this is why cloning will never work. Because if you clone me, all you get is me. You don't get diversity of thought. You don't get diversity of experience. You don't get diversity of struggle and diversity of exposure. It is only out of that variation do we evolve. So when we have people that are all thinking the same way at the table, we can never arrive at an evolutionary. We can never evolve as a people because there's not enough variation to evolve. So any organization, any community, any discussion that does not include, you need to receive this, that does not include variation will never result in evolution. I'm going to say it one more time. If what I'm involved in does not include variation, it will never result in evolution. Never. It's biologically, we don't work that way. God does not work that way. And so the reality of it is there's got to be partnership. There's got to be collaboration in order to win, in order to get victory. You know how many young people, older people for that matter, because we have older people going to college now, you know how many people struggle in school for one reason and one reason only? Not because they can't absorb. It's because of the pride of not asking for help. Because I'd rather get a C by myself than to get an A with a partner. And we are wired this way. We'd rather be broke than to ask somebody with money how you got it. We would rather cook a bad meal than to call up somebody and say, share the recipe. Because we have this natural inclination that we just fight against exposure that's different than me, even if it's going to make me win. So the issue of the partnership of the winning is essential. Let me say a second thing about it. The other thing about this partnership of winning is that it helps me understand that help comes in unsuspecting ways. It was never on the radar, and I want to, boy, I hope you get this. I hope you get it. It was never on the radar that God would rain down hailstones to help give them victory. This is the value, say this to yourself, this is the value of my obedience. The value of my obedience is that I'm not smart enough to know where God is going to send help. And I've seen this so many times in people. I've seen this so many times. Sometimes I set people up just to see where they're going to go with it. And sometimes all it takes to get blessed is just to be obedient. I don't need to know where it comes from. I don't even know how God is going to do it. I'm not smart enough to know that. All I need to know is, you know what? If I'm doing what God says do, help is going to come in unusual ways. I've seen this. I've seen this when people tithe. And they're like, man, I don't really know how this is going to work out for me. Things are a little bit tight already, but you know what? My job is to be obedient. God's job is to shower down hailstones. You know what's ironic? When we look at Joshua chapter 10, all of the emphasis, as a matter of fact, the pericope even says the sun stands still, right? So Joshua 10 is this whole issue of God causing daylight to be extended so that his people can get victory. So we focus so much on the miracle of the sun standing still that we discuss very little the miracle of God sending down hailstones. I mean, think about it for a moment. It literally says in verse 11, at the B portion of verse 11, there were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. The miracle of the hailstones was a direct result of the obedience of Joshua and the people. And it's very important, y'all, that we recognize, and I want to just pause here for just a moment because I want us to see this thing. I want us to get a hold of this thing. When we are obedient, God will send help in unsuspecting ways. When you say, I'm going to go ahead and do it, God is like, I got you now. I'll rain down hailstones. Let me say this for somebody that needs to hear this. Please get this. Write it on your mirror. Tattoo it in your heart. I want you to get it in your psyche. I want you to hear me. It's going to make a difference in your life. I need you to hear me. God is not out of hailstones. God still has a whole arsenal available to support us when we are willing to be obedient. It's the partnership of winners. But it's not just that. I want to try to get done this today, so let me push real quick. The fourth thing is about the prayer of winners. Say this to yourself, no praying, no winning. I just want you to get it. No praying, no winning. If you look at verse number 12 now, it says, at that time, Joshua spoke to the Lord. Whenever you see in the Bible that somebody's speaking to God, that's prayer. Because that's all it is. When we talk to God, we're praying, right? So in essence, he's praying. And at that time, Joshua prayed to the Lord. Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel. Now, everybody say in the sight of Israel. This is so important. See, some of us don't have enough, oh God. Some of us don't have enough faith to pray big in public. If you notice the whole, look at this. He said, everybody say in the sight of Israel. I want you to get it, in the sight of it. So he's the king, right? The whole nation is watching him pray. He doesn't just go in and start mumbling in his mouth. No. They are listening to him pray. And he says, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. Let me say a few things about this prayer for a winner. First thing I want us to grab a hold of is, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's truthful. I must be involved in an activity that God sanctions and supports. See, some of you out there on your own dime. You out there because you want to be out there. And then you want to bring God all up in it, ask him to help you now. God not in that. God is saying, no, don't come talking to me about something I never sanctioned. The reason, I want you to see the power of this prayer. Let me remind you of what's going on here now. The sun is setting. God has already said, I'm going to give everybody over to you. Men have died by the sword. More men have died by hailstone. But watch this. The sun is setting. The sun is setting, and Joshua now knows here's the problem. What I'm seeing in the natural is different than what you showed me in the spiritual. Because in the spiritual, you said to me, everybody is going to get conquered. In the natural, some of them are going to escape when night hits. So I need to pray. I need to pray so that what you said to me in the spirit will happen in the natural. So the only way what you said to me in the spirit can happen in the natural is if you cause nature to obey you. So God, this is what I need to have happen. I need the sun to stay right where it is. And I'm praying that bold prayer in front of everybody. Let me say something about this. The first big thing now is that I must be involved in activity that God supports and sanctions, right? Here's the second big thing. The second big thing is that I have to be willing to risk my own embarrassment. I think God does not do big stuff because we're too embarrassed. We're not willing to take the risk that I'm going to look crazy if God doesn't do it. God can't say this in front of everybody. If I say this in front of everybody and you don't do it, then it looks like I'm not spiritual. It looks like I'm not hearing you. It looks like I don't have discernment. It looks like I don't know how to get a prayer through. God, I can't do that. I can't risk this in front of everybody. I want you to hear this. Stop wanting God to do stuff in front of everybody, and you're not willing to pray about it in front of everybody. You want God to show, fix the marriage in front of everybody. I want everybody to see how much we love each other. Then stand up and open up your mouth. Put the prayer out there in front of everybody. Risk your own embarrassment. Joshua is willing to risk the embarrassment of his leadership, the embarrassment of his spirituality, the embarrassment of his discernment in order to get a bigger blessing. Here's the third thing, though. The third thing about this prayer that winning people pray is that we understand, and that's right, I said we, because I'm just not professing loss. I'm professing victory. Prayer is not supplemental, it is instrumental. See, we view prayer as, kind of like we as a family, we take our vitamin supplements, every day. We're very faithful. I never miss. Every day I take a multivitamin. Every day I take 1,000 milligrams vitamin C. And it is supplemental. But I want you to understand something. Prayer is not some add-on. Prayer is the instrumental perspective of my victory. You've heard me say this before. I'm going to keep saying it. Nothing happens until after prayer. There was a time where I said things don't happen until after prayer. I've elevated that. Nothing happens until after prayer. And here's the other thing about the prayer. I'm almost done. If my prayers are not impossible to me, then they are insulting to God. He prays a prayer, literally, and he says, sun, stand still at Gibeon. I'm praying something I can't do. I'm praying something only God can accomplish. And unless I'm willing to pray stuff that's impossible for me, then God is like, why are you talking to me? If you could have done it on your own, why are you talking to me about it? If my prayers are not impossible to me, then they are insulting to God. I want to encourage you, type this in, say it, tweet it, pray big. Pray big. Stop praying. Let me tell you why you should pray big. Because what I pray about reveals how I see God. What I pray about reveals what I believe about God. Joshua understood God is big enough to run the sun and the moon. And because of that, I can pray something impossible for me so that it won't be insulting to God. Everybody say, pray big, pray big. I'm out of time. I'm going to run to the last point. My very last point, and I really have another one in between, but I'm going to skip it. My last point is the perseverance of winners. The perseverance of winners. Look at verse number 13. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped. I want you to jot this word down. Everybody say until. Until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Now, let me tell you why that matters. Because once the sun, this goes into the will to win. Once the sun was suspended and the moon was suspended, Joshua then had to get back to fighting. They had already marched all night. So you know they had to be exhausted. Now they fought all day. And now they're going into a second day in essence. Because the sun should have set and they should have went to bed at night, but they kept fighting. This is how winners think. Boy, this is an attitude that doesn't exist in our generation anymore. I'm about to have tears in my eyes. I grew up that you studied until. My mom and dad used to both sing on the choir. They would come down church on their Sundays to sing, and choir rehearsal would go so long because they would rehearse until they got it right. I would stay up all night. Come on, college students, y'all don't do enough all-nighters. I'm not talking about all-nighters because the test is tomorrow. I'm talking about all-nighters because I developed the discipline of studying until. Winners have a perseverance about them. We study until. We pray until. We talk until. Some of you, relationships are all jacked up. Relationships are all jacked up is because you won't talk until you work it out. You talk until you're sick of each other, until you, I don't want to talk no more, I don't want to talk no more. That's not how you win. Joshua, literally, God suspended the sun and the moon until. And I want to encourage you that if we're going to win, we've got to be willing to discipline ourselves and to fight until there's a victory. Thanks for listening to Orthos. I hope you enjoyed today's Bible study. If you've got questions or comments or feedback, I'd love for you to share it with me. You can email me at james@jamesgailliard.com. I would also encourage you to follow me on one of my social media outlets. Go ahead and subscribe, either at Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or Instagram. Again, thanks for listening. See you next week.